All right, we're going to get started. This is actually an interview workshop. I had a slides prepared for this based on previous interview things I've done, but I thought as I was considering starting this in a little bit, I thought I would go over some things real quickly before doing the slide PowerPoint. And we may not even do the PowerPoint depending on how long this takes, about ways to prepare for interviews and really what you should be doing to prepare for interviews. Now, I wanted to share with you just a couple of statistics that I think are very interesting and really at the same time that they're interesting, they're disturbing. And because we get at BCG, we get a lot of interviews every day. I think yesterday we had 15, or I don't know what the number was, but every day we get a lot of interviews. And there's a difference in terms of what happens to people that get interviews. So if one of my candidates gets an interview and I talk to them about it, a Harrison candidate gets an interview, and I talked to them before the interview, and I talked to them, I would say somewhere between 70 and 80% of those interviews can lead to offers. Now, and that's what I'm going to teach you about today. I'm going to teach you everything that I basically talk to people about when I prepare people for interviews. In general, recruiters preparing people for interviews, in general, you're getting somewhere in the neighborhood for interviews, somewhere in the neighborhood of, I don't know, probably 50%, but it depends on the recruiter. So I would say like 30 to 60% in general of those can lead to offers. So that's actually pretty good too. But here's what's scary. Here's what's very scary. So we have also no preparation. So sometimes what'll happen is, and this happens quite a bit, is we try to prepare all of our candidates for interviews. But a lot of people say, I'm fine, I don't need any preparation, I don't have the time, and that sort of thing. And what happens then is very scary. It's 12 to 15% of the interviews that people get lead to offers. And these differences are huge. And it's something that you should really be aware of, that this preparation for interviews is very meaningful. And the stuff I'm going to talk to you about today, I'm going to talk to you today about everything that I say to people. I've written a lot of books about interviewing. I've written lots of articles about interviewing. And if you're signed up for this webinar today, I will send you copies of the books and things I've written. And one of the books I've written, which is, I think, Top 23 Interview Tips, is something I definitely would recommend reading. If you're one of my candidates, I also sent it to you this week. But this is a big difference. Look at 12 to 15% with no preparation, and then getting prepared by a recruiter, 30 to 60%. Again, it depends on the recruiter, what the recruiter does. And if I'm talking to people, it's usually 70 to 80%. So the idea is, what is happening to what's happening in the preparation that I'm doing, or what is happening in the preparation the recruiters are doing, that really is making the difference between people getting offers and interviews and people not getting offers and interviews. So the first thing to understand, and this is a kind of a major rule, and it's something that no one really understands when they're going into an interview, is every time you get an interview, the employer wants to hire you. The employer is actually very enthusiastic about hiring you. They hope that you will work out, because it's a lot of work interviewing people. Think about that. They have to bring someone in. They're interviewing you typically because they need money. And if you don't get the job after the interview, it's almost always your fault. You've done something wrong to not get the interview. There are people out there that are very good at interviews, that anytime they go into an interview, they almost always get a job. I've met lots of people like this in my career, and there are people that are very good at interviewing, and they're doing the things I'm going to talk to you about today. There's also people that go into interviews and don't get jobs consistently over and over again. I've seen people that go into 15 interviews and don't get a single job. And then I've seen the same people go into every interview that you would never even expect and get the job. So there's a science to this, and there's things that people do when they're doing an interview that's important. But you just need to remember, if you get an interview with someone, there's more than 50% likelihood that you should be getting an offer. And because if you're not, it's your fault, and it's because you're not doing certain things. There's this matrix that I go through and teach everybody, and it's the same for interviews. It's the same for your resume. And it's there's 6 questions that everyone's asking when they interview you. And these are the 6 questions, and I'm going to go through them real quickly. And I think the reason I want to do this as opposed to just go through a PowerPoint is because this will kind of frame things that you may have later about the interview and what you should be doing. But the first thing is that they're asking is whether or not you can do the job. And when they look at your resume already shows if you can do the job or not. It shows your employer, which they'll know something about. Usually, if they don't know something about your employer, your resume will discuss the type of work you do. It will show your law school, if that's important to them. It will show your previous experience. So if they're bringing you in for the interview, they already know that you can do the job. And most attorneys, you go to law school and you don't learn anything about how to be a corporate attorney or a litigator. You learn some stuff about that, but all the teaching in any law firm happens on the job. So they know when they bring you in, if they brought you in, that whatever the job they have that they're interviewing you for, they know that you can do it. So it's not something you need to prove. So people go into interviews all the time and they think, I need to talk about how I did this and I did that, and I better list all these things that I did. And that doesn't mean you can do the job. That's any practice area, by the way, anybody can pick up. It's not that hard. You can, if you're a litigation attorney and you want to go do a certain type of litigation, you can pick it up. It's not, so you don't need to go into the interview with the idea that you need to convince people that you can do whatever the job that they have is. They've already reached that conclusion. And I just want to be very clear that when someone's bringing you in for an interview, they already believe that you can do the job. The only way you can show the employer that you can't do the job is if you give a lot of wrong answers. For example, with litigators, sometimes they want litigators that they want to be able to send them to court. And so if someone says, I never want to go to court, obviously you can't do the job. If someone says, I don't want to have to work in an office, I'd rather work remotely. If that employer wants people to work in the office, that means you can't do the job. If someone says, I would like reduced hours and they need someone that's full-time, that doesn't fulfill the job. So when you say things you don't want, or when you start pushing things out like that, this is where people get into trouble. People always go into interviews and they put their needs first and they think about what's important to them without realizing that these same employers are interviewing many times many people. So what bad interviewers do is they start thinking about all the stuff that they don't want in a job and they start putting that out. And it's very easy for an employer to reject you after an interview when you start saying things. All you need to do is say a couple things like that. If you say, I don't want to go to court, or I don't want to have to work in an office, or once you say one of those things, if that's not what the employer wants for their job, you're done. That's it. And this is a mistake that people make. They go in thinking, I wonder if the employer will give me this. I wonder if they'll give me that. And this is what's important to me. And you tell them, and none of this stuff helps you. So you need to be very careful about saying anything that's giving the employer an indication that you may not want to do the job. These are huge, or you may not be able to do the job. These are huge problems that people make, and they think that they may need to have a skill set, and that's what's important. But doing the job is all about these kind of things that the employer wants. And again, it's not your responsibility when you're interviewing to tell the employer all the reasons that you don't want a job or the things that are important to you. Your goal really is to go in and to do everything you possibly can to make sure that you're able to get the job. And you want to go in and sell yourself, and you want to give all the right answers, and you don't want to give any indication that there's things about your employer that may not make it look like you want the job. So here's some things that people do that show people they can't do the job in their interviews. So a lot of times people will say negative things about their employers. And this is very common, to say negative things about your employers. People will talk about problems with the employer, things that they didn't like about the employer, how the work was assigned in a certain way, how the firm was disorganized or too organized or whatever. But once you start saying negative things about your employer, your past employer, the employer is going to believe that you're going to basically have problems with them too. And so that's not the kind of person they want to bring in. Now, I'm going to talk more about that in the future, but saying anything negative about your former employer is going to hurt you. I had a funny thing happen. I was thinking about this week, there was a thing about, I don't know, or maybe a couple of weeks ago, about Trump and this Stormy Daniels and everything. And I remember working with attorneys from Michael Avenetti's firm when all the stuff was going down and he was going to prison and everything. And these attorneys weren't even saying anything negative about him. They were just, I'm looking for a position, and which is very funny. But when you think about it, obviously they had very negative opinions of their boss, and these were some very good people, but they didn't say anything negative about him, even though he was in the headlines for trying to extort money from Nike and all. Nothing. They said nothing negative about him and were very classy people. They basically looked like they gave the impression they could do the work and they didn't say anything negative. So when you start saying negative things about the employer, you're just telling the employer things that make it look like if those things come up and when you're employed for them, that you won't be able to do things the way they want. Now, this is a tough one here. And this is especially tough right now because a lot of people are losing their job. I've never seen, in terms of the market right now, I think this is a very scary market for a lot of people, especially with a lot of large firms, especially for transactional attorneys. And a lot of firms did overhire. And when the economy was much better, especially in 2021. So a lot of people have lost their positions. And employers are often concerned about if they hire someone, is it because there was something wrong with that person and if they lost their position and so forth. So you need to basically, when you go into an interview, you need to make it look like you were the best person in whatever department and that you're the exact kind of person that should be doing this type of work and that sort of thing. And you're interviewing with the firm and the firm needs to believe that you're extremely enthusiastic. And if you look many times like you lost your last position, the presumption is going to be that maybe you weren't doing your last job well, so maybe you can't do this job well. But just remember that, especially if you lost your position, and a lot of people now, a huge number, if you're unemployed right now, you're definitely not alone. I mean, by saying you're not alone, there's tons of people that have lost the numbers are huge. And once someone brings you in, they want to hire you again, but they're also, if they're looking at your last position, brought you in, they're not concerned about it, but they will be concerned if you start giving clues that maybe there was something wrong you did or something, then they will be a little bit concerned. Another thing that makes it look like you can't do the job is if you're not really particularly interested in the subject matter. So this is a very important point, and it relates to other points we're going to talk about today. But being interested in the subject matter means that whatever the job is, if it's construction law, doing with real estate litigation, or whatever the position is, you need to look like you're very interested in that particular subject matter. And the law firm needs to believe that you're going to be interested. I give this example a lot, but if you had a serious illness, you would want to hire a doctor that was extremely interested in whatever your illness was. If you had brain cancer, you'd want to go to the best brain cancer doctor. And this is how people talk about their doctors, and it's also how they talk about lawyers. And so you need to look like you're very interested in the subject matter. If you look like you're interested in the subject matter, you look like you can really do the job. There needs to be some sort of way you can communicate you like the subject matter in your interviews, but you need to be very interested in the subject matter. People need to believe you're interested in the subject matter. And if you're not interested in the subject matter, then you may be able to do the job, but the person that's interested in the subject matter is going to be much better. And then a lot of times people will seem unwilling to do the stuff that's asked of them. So they'll say things like, I'm happy to do this kind of work, but I expect to be challenged in other ways. And they'll put in all these kind of things into the interview that make it seem like that you may not be like 100% committed or that you may have reservations and about doing certain things. And really what people want is they want to hire people that they can give work to and they won't have to worry about them. They just want to basically, if you're a partner and you have a lot of work, you want to be able to give it to an associate that will do whatever is asked of them and frankly won't complain and will just sit down and do it. And that's it. And the more unwilling you seem, the more problematical you may be in terms of taking on the work, the more problems, the more the firm's just not going to be interested in you. And this is what happens. And so it's interesting, in every firm, there's always people all the time that are losing their jobs or not getting enough work or having problems because they believe that they should be doing certain types of work. Like they believe that, I remember once an example where I was with a guy that he joined a big firm in Silicon Valley and he wanted to do white collar litigation. The firm didn't have any white collar litigation, so they tried to give him commercial litigation. No, they didn't have enough. He refused to do the commercial litigation because said he was hired to be a white collar litigator. That's crazy. And so if you don't look like you're willing to do whatever they ask of you, then that's going to immediately disqualify you from a ton of jobs. And it's something you need to be very aware of, that you need to look like whatever they give to you, you're going to do it. And what an employer is doing is they're testing you. So they'll see, is this the kind of person I could give this kind of work to? Does this person look like they would do it? Does this person look like if I ask them to travel halfway across the world that they'll do it for me? And anytime you start expressing reservations about that stuff, you look like you can't do the job. Your job when you go into an interview is to give every single possible reason that it looks like you can do whatever they need. So you need to seem eager. You need to seem that they can trust you to do it, and that whatever the problems are, whatever issues that they're having with other people, that whatever their issues are in terms of what they need done, that you'll do it. And this is a huge mistake that people make. People go into interviews and they start putting all these conditions on things, and that's how they get eliminated. A lot of times the people that end up with a job are not the most talented, but they're the people that look like they can do whatever the job is. I remember once, it was funny, I was opening an office in Utah, and I was doing this training of these groups of people, like, I don't know, 10 or 15 people at a time. And we were training them in the company's core values and all the stuff that we thought was important. And most people were just listening and going along. But there was one person there who still works for me and was very enthusiastic and was like, yeah, this is great. And we should be working extra hours and doing. And so sometimes people will act like that. And if they act like that, then they're really going to be a good person. So you need to look like you can do whatever the job that they're asking that the job is. You might also ask about things, some other questions you can ask in the interview when they want to talk about the job is like, what are you looking for in the job? What do you need me to do? What do you need? What is it that people have done well in this position in the past? What is it that people haven't done well? And a lot of times that will give you a very good indication of whether or not it'll give you a good indication of the right answers to give. So the next question that employers are asking, and this again is very important, I think, is if you'll do the job long term. And I will send this to everyone too after this and after we get questions as well. But when they're asking whether or not to do the job long term, you have to understand all this stuff from an employer's point of view. So from your point of view, you're just trying to get a job. But from the employer's point of view, what the employer is trying to do is the employer wants to hire someone, and they want that person to basically come in, do the work, stick around, and hopefully stick around and make them money. The employer needs to make money. And if they're hiring someone and that person's going to leave, then the employer is just going to have to hire someone else. And that's not good for anyone. It's bad for the clients because the clients are, you have to get up to speed with a client. That takes time to learn a file and there's a switch, so that it doesn't look good for the firm or the clients. It's bad for the morale of the firm because when people are leaving, typically there's some hurt feelings. The people inside the firm, if you're leaving one firm and going to another, will think, what's wrong with us, or why can't people last here, and those sort of things. And so it really wastes everyone's time. So employers, when they're hiring people, they really want to make sure that the people that they hire are likely to stick around. And so you have to really understand, how do you give that impression? So you need to give the impression that you're likely to stick around. If you have a lot of moves, the firm's going to need to understand, like, why are you likely to stay there? What is it about this particular job that's going to make a difference? Because otherwise, they're just going to hire someone and that person's going to leave. There's all sorts of problems too, by the way. And I'm sure that you're aware of this, but I want to write down some of these problems. Some of the problems of hiring people that move a lot, and these are very serious problems, is when someone that leaves a lot, leaves places a lot, will at some point check out. So they'll check out, and when they decide they don't like wherever they are, when they decide they don't like where they are, and not do good work or work hard, do not like where they are. Sorry, just take this. And then that's one problem, is people will check out. Other problems, there's just a lot of problems, but people that check out of employers and things, bad employers hire these kind of people, but good ones don't. So it's very interesting when you look at like the top firms and the AmLaw 100 and the top boutiques and stuff, they're very good at understanding these rules. And once you get too many moves on your resume, they're unlikely to hire you because they know that it's just bad for the morale. And the whole point of what the HR departments do in a lot of these firms, it's very good, is they look at all these things and they reach conclusions about whether or not you're likely to stick around. The way firms understand this kind of stuff is really from your resume. So a lot of times on your resume, if they see too many moves or they see things that look inconsistent with what you want to do, in the long run, they'll usually reach these conclusions from a resume. Sometimes firms will bring people in and someone won't have looked at their resume very closely. They may just have looked at their current firm and their law schools or something, and they'll bring them in. But most of the time, when someone brings you in, it's your job to talk them into showing that you're going to do the job long term. And so some ways that this happens are people give clues is they'll talk about their last employer and they'll say it's not good for them or their current employer for a bunch of different reasons. And those same reasons could be ones that you would leave the new employer from. A lot of times you're looking for things in your background or previous moves that should suggest you'll stay. So one of the key points that everyone, that a lot of people miss is that you need to always look, it's your final, that the employer is your final stop. And the way to look like that would be everything about your career until now has led up to this. So what'll happen sometimes is people may start out at a smaller firm and then they go to a mid-sized firm and then finally a large firm. Or sometimes people will start out at a large firm and then develop some sort of expertise and things and maybe want to go to a smaller firm where they can develop business but there has to be some sort of logic for why is this employer like where you're likely to stay. And you need to think about that. And you should write that down before you go into an interview, because if the employer looks like someplace you're going to stay, then you're going to be much, much better off. And the employer is going to want to hire you. They're going to really trying to understand, and this is good employers, if it looks like this is going to be where you're going to stay. Does the practice area match what you want to do? Does the type of hobbies and everything about your background is really up for consideration, but you need to look like it's your final stop. So it's like the size of the employer, the location of the employer, the type of work, all of these things need to make sense. And it can't just be BS. It's got to really make sense. Now, with all of these things, like looking like you can do the job and looking like you'll stick around long term, you can do some of them well and some of them not well. But really, one of the things that I've always noticed with the best placements that I made, and a lot of placements, is when I can position someone and get them to think about this point, this is your final stop, and this is why it matches everything. It matches everything you've learned. Everything you've learned suggests this is the best place. Really makes a difference. Everything you learned suggests something is right. Suggests this is the best place. So that is very important. So everything that you've learned about what's important to you, everything you've learned about the kind of work you want to do, suggests this is the best place. Now, and then the law firm needs to believe that, because again, there are so many law firms in the country. It's just amazing. There's tens of thousands of them. There are so many law firms that, if I do a search one day in a city, just say I'm using Google for firms in a certain practice area, and I come back and I do the same search like a week later, there'll be more firms. There's so many firms, new firms, and there's so many firms. So the law firm needs to believe that you're going to stick around. And I really can't emphasize this enough. They need to believe that this firm is where you're likely to spend the rest of your career for whatever reason, any way that you can make that point. The next thing is about the location. So law firms, if you're looking at a location, like in Los Angeles, for example, you have like downtown, and then you have West LA, which is like Century City and that sort of thing. If somebody lives near Century City and is interviewing for a job in downtown Los Angeles, the employer is going to know, especially if they have a house and kids and things, that they're unlikely to stay downtown if they can get a better job closer to home. A lot of times people will apply to jobs in locations where they have absolutely no connections. And it doesn't matter so much if you're applying to like jobs in the Bay Area or like Los Angeles or New York, but it does matter when you're applying to smaller markets and mid-sized markets, because most people will go back to their home market or have no reason to stay unless it's a huge market, like a huge city. Smaller markets, there's a paranoid about hiring people that aren't from the area. And because they know, about others not from there, because they know it's unlikely you'll stick around. So you need to give people a real understanding of why you'll stick around in that area. Now, I've placed all sorts of people for the strangest reasons. Sometimes people are interested in places where they can hike. Other times people are interested in markets people have all sorts of reasons for being interested in different markets. But what a good recruiter does, and what you should do for yourself if you're your own recruiter, is you need to give the employer, when you go in, something that makes them think that you'll stick around in this location and this is important to you. And if they don't believe that, they won't hire you. What's interesting too is that I talk about this in almost every webinar and a lot of webinars. But what's very interesting is when people are relocating from most markets to their home market. So let's say you're from, I don't know, Savannah, Georgia, and you're currently working in Chicago. Like, firms in Savannah are going to be very interested in you because and it's really because of the idea that you'll do the job long term. They think this person's relocating home, so they're likely to stay. And they're not going to have a lot of choices of places to work if things don't work out with us in Savannah, because there's not a lot of firms here. So let's bring the person in. So this is how lawyers think. They want to believe that you're their last stop, and you need to figure out how to give them that indication. And I hate to say this, but even if you're interviewing with the massive firm in New York City or Houston or something, like, even that firm, as cold and impersonal as a lot of these big firms are, they're going to give a lot of preference to someone who looks like they're going to stick around and that this is important to them. And so they just have to believe it. And if they don't believe it, they know you're not going to stick around. It's interesting. One of the worst hires that I ever made, it was funny. I was looking for a designer. And I don't know, we had a couple designers we were looking for. And this guy had lost his job with Disney and as head of a whole department, making quite a bit of money and maybe 50% more than my design job paid or something like that. But he really wanted a job, and he came in and talked me into taking the job. He wasn't at the job longer than 3 or 4 months when he started complaining about the salary and how much more he was making before he got fired from Disney, and undermining my employees, undermining the other designers. And so that was a very bad hire. And eventually he left to some job, and that wasn't as good as Disney either, and left that one. But if your salary is lower than you're used to making, the employers are going to believe that you're unlikely to stick around too. So a lot of people during bad economies and during, like we are in now, when they'll interview for jobs where the salary's a lot lower than they're used to making, and the employer will know that, and the employer is very defensive about that. And so if the employer believes that the salary is going to be a lot lower, and that you're likely to move if you get a higher salary, unless there's something specific about that firm that makes you want to stay, then they're not going to hire you. They would be stupid to do so. And so they need to figure that out. Now, it's interesting what a lot of firms do when they have these kind of positions, and I've seen this actually, firms are smart. So someone may be at a huge firm and then interviewing at a firm that pays a lot less. And so sometimes those firms, rather than bringing the person in full time, will make them a contract attorney or something because they're not convinced that the person will stay. So you need to make sure, even if the salary is a lot lower, that you have some way to offset that and make it seem like it's not about money. It could be the location, the type of work, or whatever, but you have to make sure that the law firm sees that. And then these are just some other kind of things. I don't want to go into too much detail, but this whole pattern of upward mobility, the employer needs to believe that. They need to believe that this next stop you're making is your final stop. And so you need to figure out, what is it about the firm? What is it about the people? What is it about the type of work? What is it about the firm size? What is it about their clients? What is it about all these things that's going to make it likely for you to stay? And that even if you're moving to a smaller firm or a smaller market, that this represents upward mobility for you. It could represent upward mobility because you get client contact. It could represent upward mobility because you want to live in a smaller town with good schools. It's got to represent something, but the law firm needs to believe that this is upward mobility. And you can do that in a lot of ways. I had some interesting things happen with trying to place people before in smaller markets. So I had one candidate a couple of years ago that was in New York, and he was very senior, maybe 15 years out, and he was a securities attorney. And not only that, but he was from England or Australia or something, I don't remember, but he was from a foreign country and had an LM. But I think he had U.S. citizenship for some reason. I don't know how he got, but no, I don't think he had U.S. citizenship. But yeah, he did have U.S. citizenship, but it was very difficult for him to get jobs because he was so senior. And so I got him interviews in strange markets. And one of the markets I got him an interview for was I remember it was in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And there's actually some very good firms there. And that's where Steelcase is. And there's some very good firms in Grand Rapids. And Grand Rapids also has very good schools. It has a really nice style of life. The firms are good. There's very smart people there. There's just a lot of reasons that you wouldn't think so, but it's this Western Michigan town. And not only that, but it's, I don't know, it was founded by the Dutch, and it's just an interesting area. So he got this interview, and I was like, you have to go all out, and you have to explain to them that this is a great opportunity for your family to live in this kind of area. They have really good work. There's stability. You can become a partner. The taxes aren't as bad as New York, all these different reasons. And I talked to him about pitching the firm that way. And that's exactly what he should have said if he went into the interview. But instead, he was all hung up that this wasn't an AmLaw 10 firm, that all these wrong reasons. And what ended up happening to him is I think he moved back to England looking for a job and took a contract job with some English law firm doing U.S. securities law. So even if you're going to a smaller firm, is my point, or a smaller market, that law firm needs to believe that going there represents upward mobility for you. And a 15th year securities attorney moving to a really small market, Grand Rapids, that he's never heard of, doesn't even know what it is, you have to frame every interview you get in a way that is upward mobility for you. You need to think about the positives of the interview and the place you're going to, and not the negatives. Some other common moves are like people moving from New York to upstate New York is an example. Like the firms in upstate New York pay half of what firms in New York City do, but housing is 1/3 the price. And there's all sorts of reasons. The schools are good. So when you're moving to different markets, you need to make it seem like there's upward mobility, and the firm needs to believe that. When people move to New York City, that New York always thinks it's the best market, or they move to places like Miami or Dallas. And so those markets believe that if someone's moving there, it's upward mobility. But most of the time, if you're moving to a smaller market, you need to position it as being upward mobility. If you're moving to a smaller firm, you need to position it as upward mobility. If you're at whatever you're doing, you need to position like this is a positive thing, because no one wants to hire someone where you're their second choice. I interview people all the time, and that, for recruiter jobs, for example, that I believe want to continue practicing law. And I would be crazy to hire them. In different business networking groups I'm part of and things, like there's people that will indicate that they're interested, and then we'll try to go somewhere else and then come back. And so everybody has to believe that whatever you're doing is upward mobility. I can't stress that enough, but if you're able to convince the firms that whatever you're doing is upward mobility, then that's going to really pay huge dividends for you. And you will get more jobs that way. You will, because people want to hire people that are trying to go someplace and do something better. And we'll do Q&A after this presentation. I hope there's questions about this, but this is one of the most important things that you can possibly do in any interview, is give the employer the belief that this represents huge upward mobility for you, because law firms want to help people achieve their goals, and they want to believe that this is their goal. So law firms want to help people achieve goals. And so that's really important. They need to believe that you represent something very important to them, and that if you're going to fit in there, and it's going to be very important and it's going to be meaningful to you. So this is very important. The next thing is people also will give the impression that money is important. And the biggest firms obviously pay the highest salaries. And so money, everyone knows that if you go to work there, you'll make all this money. But a lot of times smaller firms are very conscious that they don't pay as much, that they don't bring in as much money, and that if they pay you a lower amount, you're less likely to stay. So if you give anyone the impression that money is the most important, or important to you in the interview stage, then you're going to get blown out of the water. So you have to know how to approach that question, and the way to approach it most of the time is to make it seem like the work's most important, or the this firm represents such and such to you. And so you have to be very careful about asking questions about compensation, about making money seem like it's the most important. And really it has to be something about the firm has to be important to you. And then the other final thing I would say is nothing in your experience suggests you will stay. What happens a lot of times is people will interview with firms. And so let's say I don't know what your particular background might be, but something in your background is maybe everything you've always worked on, I don't know, personal injury defense. And now you're interviewing and you've done that for 7 years. And now you're interviewing with a firm that does construction law. So there's nothing about anything in your experience that suggests you'll stick with that firm, unless for some reason you look committed to construction law all of a sudden. One example, a lot of people have been trying to do privacy law, which is fun. I mean, and they might be a litigator. So those people will go and they'll get certifications and do all these things to show that they're really committed, and then they'll start trying to apply for those jobs. Or it's some sort of interest in the subject matter. You write papers about it, or you do something that shows you're interested in that subject matter, and that will help them. But there has to be something in your experience to suggest you'll stay. One of the biggest things, and again, this point two, by the way, is hugely important. I will send this again to everyone after this webinar, and I hope I would refer to this before your interviews, because so many people blow this. Things about that people do that suggest they won't stay are other things that happens is people will go in-house. If you go in-house, law firms know that you're probably not going to stay. They know that you'll take another in-house job. No, you will go in-house. If you've done nothing, I saw a resume the other day. I see these resumes all the time and they're fun. I like them. People that have done things like they go to Harvard or Stanford or really good schools and do very well there, and take these jobs, I don't know, working with immigrants to get papers and to help them immigrate to the United States and Guatemala or something, just all in things that you wouldn't necessarily expect. But if you're in a different practice setting or some type of work that looks important to you, they're not going to believe you're going to stay. So you have to have things in your background to make it look like you're going to stay. Never working in a law firm during law school, and then suddenly wanting to work in a law firm, going and doing a judicial clerkship when you're 10 years out of school, just anything that makes it look to the firm like you're not going to stick around is very harmful. And so law firms really do need to believe you're going to stay. And I could talk about this, I guess, forever, but it's exceptionally important. Because when you go into an interview, everyone's prodding and trying to believe whether or not you're going to stay or not. And I do the same thing when I interview people, and it's disappointing when I realize that they won't stay, but it's actually very smart and ask those sorts of questions. I'll just tell you, like from my personal experience, some things that I did that were bad when I was interviewing initially is I had all entrepreneurs, for example, are a bad thing. So I've always been an entrepreneur and had businesses and things, but that entrepreneurs will never stay. They're obviously going to get a job in a law firm, and they're probably going to start their own business. Or people that leave their law firm and start a solo practice are unlikely to go back and stick with a law firm or go to different practice settings. So looking to some extent, if you're going to do the job long term, you just need to be able to tell the firm and give them the impression that this is very meaningful to you and you want to stay there. And then the next one, and there's 6 of these, but the next couple will be much faster, is really wanting the job. And this is exceptionally important. So there's a story that my mom told. I've told this on several of these webinars, but it's when I was very young and she took me to get a dog, and I picked out a dog, and she said, "Why did you pick that dog?" And I said, "Well, it's because it's the only dog that ran up to me and really seemed to like me," and that sort of thing. And so people will, if somebody really wants something, then it's good. And I'll tell you another quick story that's funny. When I was in law school, my first wife, who I ended up marrying, walked up to me in a bar and said, "How come you've never talked to me? Like, all these other people here have, but you've never walked up and talked to me. And I've always wanted you to talk to me." So obviously that was like, got my attention. I'm like, wow, this person really likes me. I better see what's going on. So when someone likes you and when someone wants what you have or is enthusiastic about you and also very talented at the same time, you like them back. Anytime you go into a job interview, you need to appear like you really want it. I remember once I was interviewing with I don't know, I think it was Simpson Thacher in New York, which is a great firm. And I was interviewing with this guy named Barry Ostriger, who's now a judge. And at one point during the day, he came back and he said, I like you, but you just don't really seem flat, and like you're not that enthusiastic about this. And so I'd love to hire you, but why would I, but you don't really seem like you're that excited about it. And that was a great point. I was excited, but I was also jet lagged, and because I was coming from LA to interview him. But the point is that you have to appear like you really want something. People hire people that like them. People want people that want the job, that understand it, and you need to be really fired up about it. You need to go in and look like you're really the person that wants it. I had an interesting thing happen. I used to be very involved in admissions for University of Chicago, and this is a long time ago. I don't know how long ago it was, but I remember I was in this seminar where they were talking about admissions and things, and they said something that I thought was very interesting. They said that I don't know, that back then it was, maybe they said something like 8% or 6% of the people that applied that didn't interview got in, and then something like 30 or 40% of the people that came out to Chicago and interviewed with us got in. And think about that. So and what's the difference? The difference is that if you travel all the way out to Chicago from wherever, I guess this was for LA admissions, you obviously want to go there. And that's people want to hire people that want to go there. And then I remember also when I was in high school, I don't know why I applied to it, but I applied to this Washington and Lee, and I don't know why I applied there. I don't even know what the reason, but I applied there, and I got a letter from them, and it said, "We think you're great, but we would like to know if you're your first choice or not." This is when all the admissions letters came out. And at that point, I'd already gotten to other schools and stuff, and I wrote back no, and then they wrote back thanks, but no thanks. But I'm assuming if I said yes, it was my first choice, then they would have wrote me back and said, great, you can come here. Very smart to do that. So people want to hire people that really want to be there, and so you need to understand the employer and get fired up about them. You need to think about all the positives about them, and then you need to keep all of that in mind. Let me see. Sorry, there's a problem to share. I don't know what I just happened. But you need to keep all those things in mind when you're interviewing, that the people, they're going to hire people that really want the job. So you need to be fired up. You need to list all the reasons that this is a great place. You need to come in and you need to be very enthusiastic. You need to understand the employer. You need to read articles about them. You need to talk to people in the employer, that if you can, before you even go in, or people that you've known, or things that people have said. And people really like people who like them, and they just dislike people who don't. So think about yourself if you're an employer. And so every employer has positive and negative things about them. Some employers, they may have had layoffs, or they may have people given them bad reviews, and the employers are very cognizant of the bad things people say about them, but they want to hear positive things. And so they want you to be enthusiastic when you go in, and they want you to really believe that you're likely that you like them, and you're really enthusiastic, and you want the job. And this is a huge mistake. This is something that so many people mess up. I had an interesting experience years ago. I was I wanted to hire some first-year attorneys to work in our company, and I don't know why I wanted them, but I wanted 2 or 3 of them, and so I called around to local law schools and UCLA, different schools. And UCLA, I remember, sent over a list of candidates, and I chose some to interview. And these were people I was interviewing like in October, November. So I was interviewing people that had graduated and didn't have jobs. And UCLA, I don't know what it's ranked, but it's a very good school. And and these people that I was interviewing should have had jobs. Well, the way they came into interviews, I saw right away, like, why they weren't getting jobs. They hadn't learned anything about our company before interviewing. They seemed unenthusiastic. They didn't have any interest in particularly what I was doing. There was just nothing that connected. And then on the other side, I've had people before, and I've told this story before, but one of the worst attorneys I ever hired was an attorney that came in right into my office and said, I know who you are. I can't believe you have this job, and this would be a great opportunity to work for you. And I'm very enthusiastic. And, sorry, I think there's a problem with the video. Sorry about that. oh, look at that. That's a pretty funny look. Let me fix this camera here real quick, everyone. Give me 1 second. Sorry, I think everything disconnected for a second. 1 second. I'm fixing it. Give me 1 second. All right, there we go. Okay. Perfect. Okay. So anyway, so the people that come in and act like they really want the job stick out. And that if someone really wants your job, it trumps everything. It makes the employer feel very good about themselves. It makes them feel good. And think about all the people that you've known and people that you've known in the past. The people that you like are the people that like you. And again, my first wife walked up to me and basically said she liked me and why hadn't I talked to her? And which I thought was fun. But the point is that if you really like the employer and you really want the job, then the employer is going to like you back. And very few people do this. This means reading everything you can about the employer. This means thinking about the employer and how things would work. This means being familiar with what the firm does. This means having insights into things. It means talking to people in the firm. It means all these important things to make a connection. And you need that in order to get the job. And remember, every employer is going to interview, for most jobs, lots of people. So the people that they're going to be most enthusiastic about are going to be the people that like them the most. And so if someone likes you, you like them back. The most popular people, the people that have the most friends, are the people that like people. It's just you have to really like the employer, and you need to psych yourself up. You need to just instinctively think about why this is such a great place, what you like about it. And I've interviewed people before where they've come in and they're just like shaking. They're like, I'm so excited to be here. And of course, you're going to hire that person. And at the same time, I've interviewed people that are just very somber and morose and not enthusiastic. And those are people that I would never hire. I remember once interviewing this woman that had clerked on the Supreme Court and then had been a partner in a major law firm. And she interviewed to, I don't know, be a content manager or something in our company and came in and was incredibly enthusiastic about the job. And I couldn't believe it. Like, this person is a partner. I think they were at Melvin Myers or something, and wants to take a salary cut but really wanted the job. And I ended up hiring her. And so the point is that regardless of the job, even if it's a job that appears like it's beneath you, or whatever it is, your job is to go into an interview and get the job. And you need to appear like you want the job. If you appear like you don't want the job, or just you're not enthusiastic about it, or then you're definitely not going to get it. So you need to really appear like you want it. And just think about it. Like, you may be interviewing with an employer that's smaller, that doesn't pay as much, that has a bad reputation for some reason, and you can go in and reflect all that back to the employer, and that can hurt you. I had an instance once. It was interesting. I was clerking for a federal judge, and this federal judge used to interview, he interviewed a lot of people. Like, he would get hundreds of resumes and then might interview like 10 people for this job. And the people would have to travel across the country. These are law students for this interview. And we had one guy we were interviewing that I think was our top choice. I think he was at Berkeley and really smart guy, and he was likable. But he went in and started, and I was giving him a tour of this courthouse or something. And then he asked me a question about having read a bad review about the judge on some sort of publication or something. Someone said that he was, I don't know, too serious. I don't know what it was. And he asked me that question, and he said, I just want to know what you think about that. And at that point, he became basically the last choice. And so you have to come in, and he had no articulation of why he wanted to work there. No reason. And so that hurt him, even though he was the most qualified. And so employers want to hire people that really want the job. You have to have a clear articulation of why you want to be at the particular employer, meaning that employer needs to understand why you want to be there, what you like about them, and they need to believe it. You can often ask questions that give people the doubt that they want the job. So you can ask about negative things. You can ask questions. You can take the conversation in a negative direction, and you can do all sorts of things. And if you do that, that's going to make the employer think that you have reservations, and they're going to make the offer to someone that doesn't. The other thing that's a huge mistake is a lot of times when you're interviewing, they'll ask you where else you're interviewing or what other kind of places you're applying to. And so people will do the dumbest things. They'll say, in-house. They'll say government. They'll say if they're at a large firm, they'll say large firm if they're interviewing with a small firm, and if they do some of the dumbest things. And so that makes it seem like you're not going to want the job. So if you're interviewing a small firm and they're asking you where else you're interviewing, and you talk about interviewing in a large law firm, then that's going to make them feel badly about themselves. Like maybe you don't want to be at this type of firm. So you have to be very careful about talking about that and really looking like this is the type of job you would want to have. The other thing is your long-term goals. And this is a very important one as well, like you have to ask yourself, like, what does it look like from your resume when they're looking at your resume, what your long-term goals are? And that's I wish I was doing a resume workshop today as well, because I love resume workshops. I think we did one maybe a couple of weeks ago, but your resume needs to look like there's a pattern, like a pattern. And when I say a pattern meaning an example would be healthcare. So if you're a healthcare attorney might have been a nurse and then gone to nursing school and then went to law school and then took a job in a large firm doing healthcare law, and then all of a sudden is interviewing with an IP firm or something. So the idea is that employers are asking, everything has to look like you have there's a pattern to what you're doing, and the employer needs to somehow fit in with that pattern in terms of what your goals are. And so the biggest mistake that a lot of people make on their resumes is their resumes are all over the place. And then when they're interviewing with an employer, the employer, there's nothing about that employer that looks like it's consistent with that person's long-term interests. And so you need to really look, when you're interviewing with an employer, there needs to be a fit that you really want the job. And so you need to come in with that. Now, the other thing about people that really want the job is they make a meaningful connection with the interviewer. So they're looking to make that person like them. So you're trying to make the person like you. So there's a story that I tell about one job I got, trying to make the person like me. I was interviewing with this New York law firm when I was when I was in law school. And for some reason, they were having me interview with people in their tax department, which was just weird for a summer associate. But anyway, I went into this one room and they are one office, and the attorney I was interviewing with had taken the chair and turned it so I'd have to look over my shoulder to talk to him. And I could have gone in there and moved it, but because everything in the office was so well organized, I realized that's how he wanted people to sit, because it gave him a sense of control. And so that actually worked. And he lightened up and was very nice. But people, if you really want the job and you go in and you try to make a meaningful connection, you're really just trying to like the person, and you want to think very positive thoughts about them. And if you're where your personality type is, you want to go in and try to make that connection. You want to find things in their office that you can talk about that maybe make them happy, or you want to get the person to like you. And if you really want the job, you're going to try to make people like you. This is the thing when I talked earlier in this presentation about people that go in and get every job that they possibly can, or when they have these really high close rates, what those people are doing is they're going in and they're able to make a meaningful connection with the people that they're interviewing with. They just do it instinctively. They're salespeople or whatever it is. They're able to make a meaningful connection and make people like them and believe that they really want the job. And then some other things are just having little substance, not knowing much about the employer. That's a huge red flag as well. If you go into the interview and you haven't done your homework and you don't know anything about them, you don't know how that employer fits in with your needs, and you're just trying to ask them questions, then that's really going to hurt you. I recommend before you go into an interview, you take a look at that employer and you read about them and you find all sorts of things about them that are positive, and you figure out how to really want that employer and really want to work there. Because if you do that, then it's going to come through and you're going to show it. And you really want them, you really want to look like you want the job, and you need to psych yourself up. Even if it's not something that you may not think you want, you need to get the job first. Your goal of any interview is to get the job. It's very interesting too. There's some people that are so good in interviews. And I remember it was funny. I was working with a partner in Los Angeles, And this partner was interviewing with a firm in the Midwest, and not a huge firm, but a big firm in the Midwest that was trying to staff an office in Los Angeles with partners that had large books of business. And so he was interviewing with them, and they did something. I don't remember exactly what happened, but the firm was trying to ask him to work there, and was able to offer a lot more money than even their partners were making in their Los Angeles office. And then he said something, or in their Midwest office. And he said, "Why would you do that?" And he said, and I think the firm that he was talking to, the chair of the firm, he said something like, "No one there would need to know." And then he said, "Well, I don't know, that makes me uncomfortable." And then suddenly when he said that, the firm just withdrew and basically had nothing to do with him. And it had been a long courtship process of months of interviewing. And because he said something like, "It makes me uncomfortable, I've been making more," it just gave the wrong impression. So every step of the way when you're interviewing, you need to make sure that you're constantly looking like you want the job, and that the answers that the firm is giving are along those lines to make it seem that way. Now, here's another big one, and this is a huge one about being able to be managed. And this particular issue is one of my favorites. It's something that a lot of people make mistakes on in interviewing. And there's a real good search. There's a book I'd recommend you read. Not a book, but it's called A Message to Garcia in Your Career. And it's just, if you search for harrisonbarnes.com, you'll find it. So every employer, by the way, is, when you look around you and people in your firm and everywhere you've ever worked, people that are losing their jobs, people that are having problems with their employers, people that aren't doing well, people that aren't getting raises, people that are upset and things. It's people that a lot of times aren't manageable. And some people aren't. Some people will not do what's asked of them. They'll make problems. They'll undermine the management. They'll consistently just be difficult to manage. And employers only make money, by the way, when people fall into line and are able to, and they believe that they'll be able to be managed. And being managed means, I hate to say this, even the most successful partners in the largest law firms are really basically being managed by committees and other people, and they are. This is the job of working for most employers. If you can't be managed, then you can start your own firm or whatever, but most partners and associates and everybody working inside of any firm is being managed by others. And that's just how it is. And it's not, and you need to be able to be managed. That means that the firm needs to believe that they will give you work to do, you'll do it, you won't complain, you will not create problems, you won't undermine the management, and you'll basically, I don't know if it's being a yes man is the right word, but it means that you'll respect authority and you'll you'll go along with it, do the things that people want. I can't tell you how many people I've seen lose positions because they weren't being able to manage, how many people have not gotten jobs because they look like they can't be managed. And a lot of times it's the people that are the most successful that have the best backgrounds that can't be managed. For example, people like, and I'm not picking on schools, but a lot of times people from Yale Law School will go into interviews and, hey, it's interesting, let me think about it, which again is not wanting the job. But then also they'll say, can I have this much time to do pro bono? Can I have this and this? And people don't like that. Even though having someone that went to Yale and their resume is good, if the person doesn't look like they'll follow directions, that's very scary to the firm, because firms only make money when everyone's doing the work that they're asked and doing it the way they want them to. The Message to Garcia in Your Career, it's called Your Career, it's based on a famous pamphlet that was handed out, I think, to soldiers in World War I or World War II. And it's just basically about this guy that's supposed to deliver a message to Garcia, which is some general that's in the mountains of Cuba or something, and they need someone to do it. And what it talks about is most people will find excuses not to do something and will do it in a half-shot way or will give up and things. And the idea is that there was this one person that they could rely on, that they knew even if he had to fight his way through, whatever, would get the job and do it. And so employers need people that can be managed. And it's just what it is about working for other people. And the more you look like you can't be managed, the more the employer is going to have issues with you. So these are some of the things that people do. They go in and they ask questions about remote work. Now, most law firms allow remote work, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the idea from the employer standpoint is the employer wants to believe that you'll basically do whatever they say. If they want you to be in the office 5 days a week, you'll be in the office. If they want you to show up at a 6 a.m. meeting every day, you'll show up at a 6 a.m. meeting. They just want to believe that you'll be able to be managed. And that's very important to them, because if they can't manage you, first of all, it doesn't make them feel important, but which you do is another thing you need to be able to do with employers. But in addition to not making them feel important, it basically means that you're running the show, not them. And that scares employers, because that creates all sorts of problems. And asking questions about remote work, asking questions about hours, asking questions about vacations, which I put in here later, those sorts of things create lots of problems. A lot of times people will critique past supervisors. They'll say, oh, this person has a reputation for being very difficult to work with, and that's who I worked with, and that's not good. Or if people, when they ask you why you're leaving, if you talk about anything to do that your dislike of management or what was happening there, because employers aren't stupid. They know that if you talk about those things in your next in that interview, you'll have the same problems with them. And then the whole thing about not putting the employer first. Again, there are certain people that I'm amazed. They will, and these are the people, by the way, that become most of the time the most successful. They'll do what their employer asks them. They'll put their needs first, and then the employer will basically rely on them and never let them go, because everyone needs people like that. Every partner with a huge book of business in large law firms always has people that are also partners that get all their work from them, that put that person's needs first and look out for them. And everybody wants that. And doesn't complain and is able to be managed. Every huge partner, when I'm talking about business, $10 million plus in business, will always have other people around them that are partners that put that person's needs first, and their whole career sails along like that just by doing that. So you need to be able to be manageable to work in almost any law firm. You need to be manageable because you're not going to like the procedures that the firm has. If you're a partner, you're not going to like the compensation. There's all sorts of things you won't like. But this is what employers are doing all the time, is they're sifting through all of the people that work there, and they're seeing who can't be managed. And the second they think you can't be managed, you're first on the chopping block. So I'll just tell you some examples from my own experience. So in our company, we require managers to send reports at the end of each day about what's going on. And there's always people that refuse to send the reports. So anytime we're looking to give raises or get rid of people or whatever, the first people that come to mind are the people that don't consistently send reports or do what's asked. Because if you can't rely on someone to do what they're asked and they think they're special, then those are the people that you don't like the most. And it's just how every business works. Certain law firms, I saw one law firm once where people weren't consistently sending their hours and they'd wait weeks to do it. And so when they let people go, it was the people that weren't, and there was some sort of recession, the people that refused to or never sent their hours in on time. And the firm didn't like it because that meant that the bills didn't go out on time, or the money that they billed, it screwed up the law firm's cash flow. So law firms, when they want to manage you and they require certain things, it's very important to them that you do what's asked and you show them in some sense that they're in power and that you're willing to do what's asked of them. And it's very important. It's basically you come into a position where you put someone else's needs first, and you come across as doing that, and employers love it. And I don't know what to say other than very few people really consistently show that they can be managed. They talk themselves out of jobs when they're interviewing because of it, and they ask the wrong questions. So they'll ask questions about things that are important to them, which are vacations and I don't know, or sometimes they'll ask about the employer's policy about different things, and that creates issues with employers. I had an interesting thing happen. I was hired, I don't know, like the person started, I think this week, a woman that had been a partner at some big law firms in Los Angeles to come and basically help prepare candidates for interviews. That's as a full-time job. It's a real job, but it's certainly not $400,000 a year or whatever she's used to making job. But the whole time this person was interviewing, they were saying, I'm going to be taking, they were saying things like, oh, I'm planning on a 3-day vacation towards the end of July. Is that okay? And would it be okay if I didn't work in the office for a few hours every Thursday because I have a standing appointment to take my husband to some kind of doctor? These sort of questions, that's someone that can be managed. And that person had a lot of really good jobs as a partner in big firms. And just listen to those kind of questions they were asking me. Someone that can be managed, like they're doing what the employer asks. And employers, by the way, hate it. If you read I was reading an article about if you're not manageable, like you can get away with it for a while. But the employer, especially when the economy, it gets in bad shape like it is now, these are the people that the law firm will come after. Anybody that they believe is not manageable, that's not towing their weight, will essentially be the ones that go, because the law firm wants to be able to manage people. And again, this is a huge topic. It's what the best partners do. It's what the best associates do. It's what the people that get jobs do. I had a woman once that I hired, and things worked out horribly with her. It actually went very well, but then she got in over her head on some matters we were working with, and essentially quit her job. And I was upset, but she was actually very talented, and even to the last day was saying, what can I do? What can I do? What can I do? What can I do? And very manageable. People, like, this is extremely important. Like any way that you look like you're going to go there and serve the person, you're going to appreciate the job, and you're going to be able to be manageable, is hugely important for all employers. And they want to really believe that. And if you can do that very well, you're going to get a lot more jobs than you otherwise would. And asking a question like in an interview in February, is it okay if I take 2 days off in July to do something? Wow, that shows someone can be managed. And you just have to be very cognizant of that. Anytime you start talking about hours, anytime you start talking about working remotely, anytime you start talking about thing that shows that you're putting your needs first, you're going to get into trouble. And so and again, this should be advice for anywhere you're working. You want to make sure that people will believe you can be managed. And the best people, like most manageable people, and the people that do the best are always saying good things about their bosses, like and excited to get work. And I'll tell you a quick story that was interesting. There was and this was a sad story, but it's actually a very interesting story. So I was at this law firm that's no longer in existence called Dewey Ballantine. And they made this horrible mistake that one Friday, they sent out this email that was supposed to go to all partners, but instead it went to all personnel. And basically in the email, they talked about all of the people that they were going to make partner, the people that they were going to not make partner and defer, and then comments about it, won't leave if we defer for 1 year. And just a real big mistake. And then after doing that, they realized what they'd done, and then they shut down the power in the whole office so they could go in. It was funny, and send everyone home. But one of the guys that had received that email that said we're going to defer him was upset, obviously. And on Monday, this partner came into his office and said, I need you to work on this task. And it was some kind of stupid thing that he wanted done right away that was really beneath the kind of work that a 12th year associate or whatever should be doing. And he was mad, and he said, you know what, I don't really want to do it right now. I'm in a bad mood about what just happened. And could you give me a little bit of time to cool off? And the guy looked at him and was like, all right, whatever. And then he came back into his office. And again, this is someone that had been with this firm for, keep in mind, like 12, 13 years. And he came back into his office, and like a half hour later, and he said, you have two choices. One, you can sign the severance agreement and take this check right now. And it was a big check, like tens of thousands of dollars, or you can just be fired and leave. It's up to you. And this was a very old school partner that had come over from another firm. But think about that. I mean, the guy's saying, I won't do the job. I don't want to do it. I'm not going to listen to you. Give me some time. And he literally lost his job. The good news is the guy wound up at another big firm, and years later became a partner there, and is much better off because Dewey Ballantine went out of business. But the point is, that's someone that showed they couldn't be managed. And I've seen so many examples of this. I saw one time when I was in a big firm, an associate decided to call reporters about a case or something and lost his job because of that. So anytime you do anything or give clues you can't be managed, law firms hate it, and then you'll not get a job. So always give the impression that you can be managed. Always give the impression that you'll do whatever's asked of you in interviews, and don't make it about you. And then the next one is, do we like you? People hire people that they like. And so people really want connection. And being liked there's a lot of ways to be liked. Like, one of them is to look like you really want the job. But another way to really be liked is just to be likable. And everybody, you included, wants connection. Life is very impersonal. You go to stores and there's a lot that's very impersonal, but families and things are about connection. And that's what makes people the happiest, is having connection. And so no one has enough connection. Everybody wants connection. And most people, when they look at you, they will decide whether or not they like you. So there's studies, and I don't know if I've heard this or if I made it up somehow, but it's instinctively, I think we like about 1/3 of the people we meet. 1/3 of the people we meet, we dislike. And then the other third, we don't care. And so to really get jobs and all this sorts of stuff, people need to like you. And you always are able to get more jobs if people like you. And so what is it about interviewing that makes people like you, and how does that work? If you're interviewing, for example, with a partner and you make them feel very important and like they're a big deal and would love to be them someday, that's great. If you interview with someone you know a lot about them, they're going to like that. If you are interviewing with an associate that's at your level and you act like you would be friends with them or like you guys would get along, they're going to like you. So you have to think about ways to be likable. And there's all sorts of books about that. There's Dale Carnegie books. There's like How to Win Friends and Influence People. There's all sorts of ways to be likable, but you really want to be likable. So it's interesting, like, how do people be likable? One of the first things you do is you never brag. Like, you never talk about how great you are. You always make sure that you say, you don't say you got lucky, but you say you feel very lucky, or you make it like you're not better than people. You try to connect with people. You make it seem like you're a good person. There's an interesting book. It's called, I think it's called Save the Cat First or something like that. I think it's called Save the Cat or something. But it's actually very interesting about one of the tricks they use in movies. So if you watch movies or you watch shows enough, you'll notice that the show will always start, or Save the Cat, I'm sorry, maybe it's not even called Save the Cat, but a show will always start. And what the show will do is they'll show the main character that they want you to, they'll show them giving a bum money or doing something nice for a child or volunteering or saving someone in distress or helping someone. And the reason they do that is because they want you to like the main character. So it's one of the oldest cinematic tricks there is you want to get people to like the main character. They always show them doing something nice, being nice to a child or being nice to their spouse or doing something that you normally wouldn't expect. And so they want you to like the main character. And so when you go into an interview, you need to be likable as well. You become unlikable when you criticize others, when you act like you're important, and you talk about your qualifications and things, or you talk too much. When you're asked questions, you're evasive. When you don't ask the person questions about themselves, when you don't make a connection, I've been in interviews before where people have been checking their cell phones. Like, that's not good. You need to seem very focused on the person. One of the kind of rules, I think, of what makes people likable is you try to make it 80% of the person talking. But when you say 80% of the person talking, it's the person talking about themselves. Not necessarily not just things like, we like team players, and just not things about the firm, but 80% of the person talking about themselves. You can get the person talking about themselves, and then they're more likely to like you. And if you can seem like a good person, or someone like in Save the Cat, the story, things about you that make you likable, or you like them back, then they're much more likely to hire you. So you have to be likable. And then the final one is fitting in. And in a lot of cases, there's not much you can do about that. Different employers have different types of people that they hire. I was reading a story, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, and they were talking about investment banks and and how in England they would take a look at your shoes and how you dressed and looked, and they would decide whether or not to hire you based on that. And what that meant basically back then was it was pretty much Saxons that were a certain type of person get hired and people that weren't didn't. And then they contrasted that with Goldman Sachs, which is came in and Goldman Sachs hired people based on merit and not all these other types of things that white shoe banks and things did. But to the extent that still exists, there's still cultures of different types of firms. And so you need to understand those cultures when you go in, and you need to get a sense of what that culture is, because some cultures of the firms are the culture may be everyone worships the head of the firm. Another culture might be it's very collegiate. All the people were in fraternities and sororities. Another culture might be it's very bookish. Another culture might be everyone closes their doors. You have to and there are different cultures like that. Some cultures would be all these people are from different firms and are only there to make as much money as they can. So every firm has a different culture, and you need to understand that culture before you go in. And it's very interesting. Some cultures are you don't know, but you have to understand that. So you read about that and you talk to people there, and then you understand the culture. And so you have to act like that culture is something that you would fit in with. And that's really, and you have to understand it when you're going in. And then the better you do with that, the better off you'll be. This is the presentation. I'm glad we got done with it fairly quickly. I will take questions, but I did want to just go through some of these points again real quickly before we take a quick break and then come to questions. But again, this is the difference. Like doing this stuff will make a huge difference. Now, am I able, if I did an interview prep call with someone, to get through all of these, to get them to 70, 80% do I have to do a 90-minute presentation with them? No. But what I do is I always will go through and I'll listen, I'll talk to the person. The person will say, I want to make sure that in this job that this doesn't happen and this, and I'll just be like, no, you have to go in and look like this is the job you want. And they say, well, how do I talk about my past moves and everything like that? And you need to say, you need to frame, I've learned lessons that have made me really want to be here today, or you have to figure out this, and you have to, and again, I will send this to everyone on the call when we get off, but you need to understand like these are the questions that people are having, and they're not always going to ask them, but they're going to be in their mind. And if you've left a lot of jobs, they're going to need to understand why you're likely to stick around. And then you need to come across as someone that really wants the job. And that, by the way, wanting the job is a very interesting thing. And I could talk about it all day. There's a story that I've told before, and I'll tell it again. But one day I was in law school at the University of Virginia, and I was walking by, and I was on the third floor going to see, I don't know, a teacher or something, or professor. And I walked by this waiting area, and there was like all these kids sitting out there that didn't look like they went to the school, because they were, I don't know, I didn't know who they were. I'd never seen them before. And so I asked someone who they were, and they said, these kids are all on the wait list, because it was right at the beginning of the school year. And every year people will come and that are on the wait list, and they'll sit outside the admissions officer's door and be like, I'm here in case you guys decide to get any space. And I thought it was very interesting. And then I talked to one of the admissions people later, and he said, and that was like, and that school at that time with that particular person who's no longer there, but that would be how people would get off the wait list, because they were the people that really wanted to be there. And so wanting the job is hugely important. And then being able to be managed is important, and then being likable and all this stuff. So I would really, again, I will send this to everyone, but I would really encourage, before you go into any interview, to think about this, and just to realize that all employers are doing in an interview, they want to hire you. Everybody wants to hire you because they don't want to have to interview a lot of people. They want to find the best candidate right away, and they want to basically move on. And no one likes having to spend hours interviewing people. No one likes it's not fun for them to interview a bunch of people. It's time that they can't bill. There's all sorts of problems with it. Everybody wants to hire you, but what everyone does, most people do, is they go into these interviews and they just give all these indications that they're the wrong person for the job. They're unenthusiastic. They're asking the wrong questions. There's no fit. They're not trying to sell themselves. All these are the problems that people do. And in this day and age, by the way, like with the way the economy is and with the way things are going right now, I can't emphasize enough like how important this stuff is, because if you don't do it, just keep in mind, no preparation is 12 to 15% of what happens to people when they get an interview. They might as well, and then the preparation can take it up. These rules, by the way, that I'm showing you can take it up to 70, 80%. This is all you need to do. Why would you spend months like applying to places and waiting to get an interview and then getting an interview and not getting the job? And why would you do that when all you need to do is really do this stuff and psych yourself up? And that's it. And why is it only 80% or 70, 80%? It's because the employer maybe found someone better that did this better. But at the same time, this preparation is extremely important. I wish I have candidates that get tons of interviews and then never convert them to jobs because they don't want to be prepped, or they think they know what they want, or they want to go in and they want the employer to give them what they want. And none of this is about you. It's a whole way of thinking about things that you're really, when you work for someone else, you're there in service of their economic needs, but also their ego needs, their needs to manage people, their needs to grow their business or their firm. You're there for others, not you. And I think that the biggest mistake that people make is they go into interviews and they just think about it from their point of view. What is this employer saying that's going to sell me? What is happening here? And your job, by the way, is to go in and to get every possible job you can. Like you can ask all these questions and things later, but you have to go in and sell yourself. And then the other final point that I would make is that you're an attorney. So there are attorneys out there I worked once for an attorney that had never lost a case. And there are attorneys out there that have never lost a trial or have won everything. But what do those people do differently than the people that are losing, or part of the fifth lose more than they win? Or what do the best people do? And the best people are the people that are prepared, and they go into things and they're prepared and they figure out what they're doing that's different. I remember once I was interviewing this guy named Phil Corboy, who's no longer alive, but considered for decades the best personal injury attorney in Chicago. And how would he win every case? He was literally this incredible attorney. And what he used to do is he used to have his staff go and basically take every document in the case and dump it into a jacuzzi in his bathroom, which, I mean, sounds funny, but I guess he had a giant jacuzzi, and mix up all the files. And then he would take each document out individually and study and put them all together. I don't know exactly how the point was, but the idea was he would know the case inside out, and he would be completely prepared. And so being completely prepared means being able to answer all these questions for your interview. And you need to be prepared, because if you're not prepared, someone else will be. And there's a couple final points. One other final point that I would make that's very important is you may go into an interview and think that this employer is never going to pay me what I need, or this job's not going to lead to anywhere, or all these things. And you don't know the answers to those questions until you've gotten the job and you've negotiated and you've made the employer aware of everything. I've seen employers raise people's salaries by 50%. I've seen employers give people huge starting bonuses, like $50,000 or $100,000. I've seen things I can't believe. But all that stuff happens after you go in and you sell yourself. Like, you have a lot more leverage to ask these kind of questions and to express doubts and all this stuff after you get the offer. But you need to go in to every interview and you need to be able to do whatever you possibly can to get the job. And that means using as much of your skills and things as you can and following these rules. So I will take a quick break, and then I'll come back and then I'll answer everyone's questions. And I would ask, this is a workshop, I will answer questions as long as people have them. But I would think about, when you think about your interviews and things you've done in the past, what have you done right? What have you done wrong? And ask questions about them, because my goal is to help you and get you to this kind of 70, 80%. And again, most people, 12 to 15%, that's where most people land on the interview scale, when employers are really, when it's very easy to get up. So think about what is going on this gap with you. So I'll be back in a few minutes, and then we'll go into questions. Thanks. All right, so we're going to questions. Let me just see here. And so if you ask questions, by the way, if your name shows up, I won't, just so everyone understands, I will not show the question. I won't show your name. So I know everyone likes to be anonymous, so that's fine. Okay. So the first question is, what is the best way to respond? So anyway, I won't show your name if you ask a question, but you should ask whatever your other types of questions you have. So what is the best way to respond to an interview question asking if you have specific experience practicing a given area of law when you don't have the experience that you're capable of learning it? So no. So the idea would be that you would tell you're hoping to get this experience, or you're excited to, and you've really wanted to do it or get this type of experience. So that would be how you would respond to that sort of question. You just basically want to give the employer the idea. Let me put this actually the end because I'm going to send these to everyone. That's really what you want to do, that you really want that type of experience and you're excited about it and you're hoping to get it. That makes them happy. And again, it's actually very important to be honest about your experience as well. So a lot of times people will come in and they'll try to act like they have all these different types of experience and they're very good at this and they're very good at that. And one of the things to remember about practicing law, I remember we were reviewing a pretty interesting cover letter last week, and I think it was from an attorney that educated outside the US, and they were talking about how they were an expert in this, an expert in that, an expert in this. And the biggest way to think about this stuff is to answer, when you answer every question, act like you're not an expert for every question and need to learn. You're not an expert. So it was very interesting. I was talking to this guy that I used to live in my neighborhood, and he was a very well-known financial sort of person, I don't know, in finance, and very successful. I think he just purchased Mel Gibson's old house or something for $15 million. This guy was very successful. But anyway, the long point short is I used to ask him various questions. I'd ask, what do you think about the economy, or this and this? And his answer would always be, I really don't know. And he would, and a lot of times the very best people will always say they're not sure, they don't know, or this is where they're headed, but they don't know. So if someone's asking you a question and you don't have all the experience, you would basically tell them you don't, but you'd be enthusiastic to learn that sort of thing. Okay, let's see here. And that's really the best way to frame it. And then the more honest they see you are, the more they're going to like you. If you did lose a job in the past, what role can references from that job play to overcome the inference that you lost your job because of poor performance or you were laid off? So one of the things is right now, so many people are losing jobs. It's pretty bad. And if you have lost your job, I certainly apologize. And I hope, but you can certainly offer references. But one of the things is, especially for young attorneys, I would say, if you have less than a couple of years of experience and an employer lays you off, in most cases, it's, I'm spelling references wrong, but in most cases, it's probably, unless there's major things you were doing, like not being manageable and putting your needs first and stuff, it's usually not your fault. It's usually the employer's fault for not having enough work, for overhiring, and all sorts of things. The way to overcome these inferences that you've lost your job because of poor performance or were laid off, there's a couple of things that I've noticed that the best attorneys do. And this is actually a good point. And so what do you do if you're laid off? What kind of signals can you send the employer if you were laid off that are going to make them like you more? Or what can you do to help yourself? So most people that are laid off will watch Netflix, or they will have a recruiter help them or whatever, and not do anything. So the best way to act if you're laid off is really to show even more of a commitment than you had before. Commitment. So what does that mean? So what that means is you do things like you could write articles, you could take classes related to your practice area. You could do whatever you possibly can. You could do, just whatever. You could become more of an expert in whatever practice area you're doing. You could join associations related. This is what people do that are very, very good, because this sends the right signal. So I was working once with a woman who was actually pretty sad. She was in Atlanta and lost her job. And I don't know what happened, but the firm just basically blackballed her and everything made it very difficult for her and didn't necessarily, I don't know why, but she had a very strong personality, and she started taking all these classes and writing about our practice area and joining all these associations and traveling to all these events and things. And I was like, God, this happened to me. Like, what? I couldn't believe it. And so I became her advocate and was like telling these firms, like, this is incredible. Look at all the stuff she's doing, even though she's not employed. And she ended up getting a very good job after being unemployed. Before she found me, she'd been unemployed for over 6 months. And I got her a very good job at a firm in the Bay Area. And she was from Atlanta. She had no connection to the Bay Area. And not only that, but after that firm went out of business, it was like an IP boutique and it closed. But she had continued with this expertise in whatever it was she was doing. I don't remember what it was. It was some sort of things related to software. But she continued and she started her own practice. And the practice is a very successful practice now. And she's got her own firm, is very successful. So this is what the best people do. They stay committed and they continue pushing forward. So yeah, your references are okay, but really the most important thing is you're continuing and showing even more of a commitment than you had before, because anybody can do nothing if they're laid off or lose their job, but very few people double down and keep pushing and learning and being enthusiastic. Because imagine how does that look? How does it look to the employer if someone comes in even more enthusiastic than they were before? Sorry, enthusiastic. It's very rare because most people just get depressed and they withdraw or they become angry, but very few people show more commitment than they had before. And that's very rare. And I haven't seen that. I hardly ever see that. Most people withdraw. And the reason I like this, showing more of a commitment, is because that's the exact opposite of what people do. Like, one of the reasons, by the way, and this is hopefully will help you and on this call, because I'm sure there's so many layoffs happening right now and people losing their jobs. Most people, the reason I think that people, especially large law firms, don't like people that have been laid off. There's a couple of reasons, but one is because they have their choice. They could choose someone that's been laid off versus not. And so obviously, especially in a large city, it's going to be much safer to hire someone that's currently in good standing with their employer than someone that's looking for a job. I mean, just think about it. You're a big firm and you get 200 applications for the same job, and one of them is happily employed at a big firm and the others hasn't worked in 3 months. That's a problem. And you would do the same thing. If you're a large employer, you would favor the person that's currently employed. But the next thing is that I would say is that the other reason that employers don't like people that have been laid off is because most of the time, what the people that have been laid off are angry. And they typically take it out on the next employer. Some of the worst mistakes that I've made, are hiring people that have been fired from their employers. So I used to be, and I still am, I would have candidates who would lose their jobs and be fired, and I wouldn't really know the reasons why, or get too much into it, but I'd be like, this is horrible. You've got this incredible background and did all these things, and now you're not employed. Let me try to help you. That was just how I would. And I know no one's hiring you because you're not having, so let me set you up in this recruiting job. I would say that you're probably my competitors, or lots of them, people that I've hired in the past, typically became very angry at me and then ended up having issues with me and creating problems. And so a lot of times, and that's the employer's perspective, is when they hire people, even if they feel sorry for them and they bring them in, those people a lot of times can make problems because they're mad. And so they take out on the next employer. I told you earlier about the guy I hired from Disney, and there's little examples of that. The most problematical people that I've ever hired have been people that have been fired and were angry, and they took it out on the next employer. And then the problem is, if you're fired or you lose your job, you don't trust the next employer. You're going to cover your behind. Any second you could lose your job because maybe you were surprised the last time you did, and you don't know. You don't trust people. So you have to be very careful. And this is a really good question, because there's a lot going on. So my way to respond would be, if you're laid off, it's just something was wrong with the firm, or maybe you made a mistake, but you have to double down and be even more committed than you were in the past. So it's very few people do that. Most people become sour grapes and they carry that with them throughout their career. And being fired can be dating for people. They can define their whole life that way. And in most cases, when people are fired, by the way, and I just want to go back to these reasons, most of the time when people are fired, and it's not always, the case, but most of the time, the employers are choosing when they have to let people go. And a lot of times the people that they're letting go are people that are very difficult to manage. So that's one of the things that they just, they don't look like they're on the side of the employer. That's really a lot of times how it works. Not always, but that. So back to the question, just to make sure I do answer it. References play a big role, but large firms, like the most prestigious firms in New York, for example, like I've had people that have literally left their firm after 3 or 4 months and checked into a mental clinic or something and been there for 2 or 3 months and then got out. And after having had a nervous or whatever kind of breakdown, and then given references, and the firm will give them incredible references. Say, yes, this person was great. They were hoping we're pulling for them or whatever, if I know. But so a lot of times law firms will just give you very good references no matter what. And that's what they should do. The firms that don't are typically not the best firms, to be honest with you. But the very, very best firms, in my opinion, will always give good references. Yeah, they can play a role. But the question when someone's checking references is always, would you hire the person again? Would you? And you just don't know how that's going to be answered. So I think the best way to deal with the situation is really, if you're laid off, just double down, like commit to your practice area, commit to knowing people, commit to everything you possibly can do, because most people don't do that. There's one other story that I'll tell real quickly. It's a fun story, but it's when I was when I was young, I was going to Spain with this teacher, and we're all on a plane, this big plane flying over to Spain. And it wasn't a teacher I knew, but it was at a different, and everyone said, well, tell us a story again. There was a story that he always used to tell. And this will be very helpful if you have been laid off or ever think about getting laid off. And they kept saying, tell us the story. And so eventually he's, okay, I'll tell the story again. And the story was pretty interesting. He was in Cuba and he was locked up for being a capitalist. I don't know, but he was locked up in this horrible prison, and everyone around him was using drugs and not taking care of themselves and fighting and everything. And he said that what he did is he got up every day and he exercised and shave and take good care of himself. And so he looked very good, and everyone in the prison looked horrible. And so he said one day there was visiting hours and someone, and I don't know how he got new clothes and everything, but when the visiting hours ended, he just walked right out of the prison and no one knew anything from the difference, because he managed to take care of himself in the middle of this horrible situation. And so this is what you need to do if you're laid off. You need to double down and become even better and a better attorney and more of that than other people around you. And that's, again, most people, they get mad, they don't take responsibility and all that sort of thing. If I'm willing to relocate if I get a job, what is the best way to tell them? So if I was anyone on this call and I was looking for a job, what I would do is I would apply as many places and as many markets as I possibly could. Now, this isn't something that most people do, but it works. And you will, if you apply to a lot of markets, there will be people that are interested in you, and you should. So I recommend that everyone do that. Now, there's certain markets like California, if you don't have the bar, and Florida and New York, you definitely need to have some things going. But what's the best way to tell them if you get the job? You say, I'm very interested in living here. I have friends here, or this is the exact kind of community I want to live in, or you give people that indication. I've interviewed people before coming out to work in Los Angeles, and they could be in South Florida or something, and then they come out to interview, and I'm like, what did you do? You came in on Friday and it's Monday. What have you been doing all weekend? And they say, I'm very excited. I've been looking at houses and talking to realtors. And I'm like, wow, you must really want to. So you make people feel like you have some sort of interest in the area and that you're very enthusiastic. And if you're able to do that, then people are much more likely to want to hire you than if you don't, because they want to feel like you're connected to the area or you have some interest in it. Yeah, it's how important is it to research the law firm prior to the interview? Yes, you should read everything you possibly can. You shouldn't read negative information. You should read positive information. You shouldn't put thoughts in your mind. You should put nothing but positive thoughts in your mind, and you should feel very good and enthusiastic about the firm prior to the interview. You should do what you possibly can to look to understand the firm and to know a lot about it. And the more you learn, you should also visualize yourself working there and think about those sorts of things. But the more you research the firm and the more you know about them, the better off you're going to be, because people again like people that like them. And if you are able to research the firm, you'll be much better off. Okay, here's another interesting question. I love these longer questions, so this is a good one. All right, so let's see. I graduated my GED 10 years ago and just took the February bar exam. Okay, I'm looking to work in my hometown. I once hired someone from Spartanburg, and I loved her accent and the market to work at another company. And the market is very small. I've been reaching out to firms, and there appears to be some opportunity. Once I get the bar result, I plan to make another round of contact with various firms. Is there any advice you can think about to convince a few firms that are thinking about expanding, hiring a new associate? I've been in luxury service sales for 10 years. Okay, so law firms, when they're hiring, and 10 years isn't that long, so you could be in your mid-30s for all I know. But if you do want to get hired, you basically need to convince people to hire you. So if I was looking for firms in Spartanburg, you could probably, I don't know what kind of firms there are there, but there's got to be personal injury firms, there's probably family law firms. What I would probably recommend, and I recommend for everyone on this call that's looking for a position, is you basically have two types of firms. You have consumer facing, which are representing individuals. Sorry, I'm just going to write this down, individuals. And then you have company facing, which are representing companies. As I'm sure you're aware, the most difficult jobs to get are going to be the company facing. Without getting too far into it, companies have a lot of money to spend. They want to hire attorneys with the best pedigrees and whatever. And then consumer facing firms, the consumers don't know University of Michigan Law School from Thomas Cooley. They don't know. And Thomas Cooley, again, is not a bad school. I'm just saying that, but they're different schools. I don't even think I think it's called Detroit. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But the point is that consumer jobs are much easier to get. Anybody that's trying to get a position and not having a lot of luck, you're actually always going to be able to get. Anybody can get a job in a consumer-facing law firm. It could be doing consumer bankruptcy. It could be doing personal injury. These positions don't pay a lot of times, but the benefit is you learn a type of law. It could be immigration, where you can actually make a lot of money in the future because you can start your own business and stuff. So if you were in luxury service sales and you do consumer-facing work, then you're going to be much better. Then that's good, and you could actually have a very good career doing that. But so that's what I would do is I would look at consumer-facing law firms and someone will hire you because it's personal injury, it's divorce, and those sort of things. That's how I would be able to get a job. In Spartanburg, South Carolina, I'm sure there's tons of people or firms that, you would be able to get a job at. Okay, let's see here. This next question. But yeah, so that, again, anyone that's having a hard time getting a job and nervous about the market or whatever, I always recommend trying to work in consumer-facing jobs, consumer-facing law firms. Anyone can get it. And when I say anyone, I mean anyone can get a job in a consumer-facing law firm. You just need to write enough of them. Now, they're not always going to pay a lot, but you will learn a skill that you can sell. I know trust and estates attorneys that have their own practice that make well over millions of dollars a year with their own practice that don't have any special legal skills. People that do personal injury, that's the same thing. So anytime, if you're not having luck getting into company-facing firms, which typically require the best law schools and pedigrees, who cares? Go to work for a consumer-facing firm, because if you work for a consumer-facing firm, you're also going to be able to learn a business that you can start anywhere. And again, a lot of the most successful attorneys start out at company-facing firms where they're working for huge companies doing commercial litigation and stuff. And then they're like, hey, there's actually more money and it's easier to get business from consumers. So I'm going to switch from commercial litigation to do family law. I'm going to search from corporate to do trust and estates. It's very smart. And I know people that went to Yale Law School that are family law attorneys. And I saw another guy that was this morning that was at the very top of his class at the University of Chicago and decided to become a criminal lawyer, just shang on his own shingle right after law school. You can do this kind of stuff. It's smart. How do law firms assess a candidate's fit with their culture, and what can a candidate do to demonstrate cultural alignment? Well, different law firms have different personalities, and those personalities can get a sense of the culture when you interview with them, you'll see how people behave and act, how the firm acts when you get an interview with them, how things work. And so you just try to be comfortable with it. So it's very difficult to understand the culture. You can't always understand it from the website. You can understand it based on how the firm interacts with you. And then when you get into the firm, based on the people that they have you talk to, and this is how you do it. But the cultures of firms are very unusual, and a lot of them are very unique. And most of the time, if it's a unique culture, the law firm will try to tell you why it's unique. When you're interviewing with them, they will, or before you even interview with them, they'll learn things about their culture. So they may do things that they think are important to them. So let me see here. Let me just do the next question. Okay. Can you provide some insight in what law firms are looking for candidates beyond academic credentials and legal experience? Yeah. So the things I spoke about is they want to like you. So they want to like you. But the other big one is, can you be managed? It's a big one. Will you do the job long term? Job long term meaning, are you going to stick around, and all those sorts of things. Again, one of the biggest mistakes that people make is law firms, like they do hire based on academic credentials. That's definitely true. It's true for company facing law firms, meaning law firms representing companies. It's not so much true for consumer facing, but the academic credentials are important. But really, when they're only important for a short period of time, because all the academic credentials show is they show that you're smart and you have a lot of potential and you were able to get into good schools or that were competitive to get into. So the academic credentials are important. They're also important for the clients. The academic credentials basically show, and people ask this all the time, so I'll just get into it. But the academic credentials show, that you did well in competitions before. Then you got competing with other people that, and then learn with equally competitive people. And then look good on paper for clients. So what clients, and then are probably very smart. Are smart. So again, I'm going to talk about each of these real important because people are always harping on their academic credentials. What I can tell you that's very interesting, and this is something that no one really teaches, but I'm going to teach it right now, is people come out of school or they're in really good schools, and they think that the most important, and then they think, wow, I've graduated from this top school and I should be really well received in the market. And you will be, to some extent, received if you went to a good school, because it benefits the firms to have people that went to good schools, benefits certain firms to have that. So meaning company-facing firms. So what a law firm will do is anytime that you're put on you'll be on their website. And then if you're put on certain matters, the clients will see your educational background. They'll think, okay, this person went to this great school and did well there, so therefore it's worth paying what we are for this firm. That's fine. It will also show that you're smart and able to grasp things. Certain people are smarter than others, which is whatever. And if you went to a top law school or did really well or stuff, that looks good. So that means you're smart. But again, the smarts matter and your credentials matter. Equally competitive people. I think personally that one of the benefits of the best schools is just you're around people with big ambitions. And so that rubs off on you. So again, if you go to certain law schools, it's going to be really important to go into public service. If you went to others, it's going to be important. But the academic credentials are really okay, but they're very unimportant. After you've been out of school for a couple of years and you started making all these choices, or you've made choices early in your career, because what the law firms are really concerned about, and what any employer is really most concerned about, is they're concerned about if you're going to stick around. Does it make sense for them to hire you? Do you really want to work here? So does it really, you've done all this public service work, why would you possibly want to work here? Or can you be managed? Like, why do you have all these gaps in your resume? Or why are you doing all these things? Do you think you're more important than us because you went to this great school or whatever? So all this stuff, and I just want everyone to understand, if you went to a really good school, your academic credentials are are only important to the extent they help you get in the door early in your career. But after you've been out of school for 3 or 4 years, it doesn't matter. It's actually more important if you are, from my standpoint, if you're consistent in a practice area, then, so a lot of times people might have gone to Harvard's a huge law school. So people will go to Harvard and they'll come out and they might work in a big firm, and then they'll decide that they want to go in-house or something, and boom, you can't get back into big firms probably after doing that. Or they'll go to Harvard and they'll come out and they'll go into work in some public interest organization, and they'll decide they want to work in a law firm. And so and then law firms will close the door on them. And so I'm just using Harvard as an example. It doesn't matter really where it is, but the more you do things that show you're unlikely to be managed or that you don't want the job, the more it's going to hurt you. So you really have to focus on, and again, I will send this out to everyone who's been on the call, you really have to focus on these other points. And the most important ones really are, do you do the job long term? They're asking that. And then, I'm sorry, I'm moving so fast, but will you do the job long term? That's the big factor. Does it make sense for them? Does it really look like you're going to stick around? Do you really want this job? Why would you, if you went to work in-house and you were in-house for 3 years, why would you possibly want to come back to a law firm? Or if you left the law firm and now you're teaching, I see this all the time. I see people that left like these big law firms and now they're the dean of some law school, and then they submit their resume in BCG, which is great, but it doesn't look like they're going to stick around if someone hires them. So you have to, they might, but very rarely. And then can you be managed and all these other things? So these kind of questions this is a very good question, but academic credentials are really not that important. And some people go through their whole careers talking about how they went to this top 5 law school, but then they do all these things that, and this opens the door, of course, but then the door closes by all these things people do, which show they can't be managed or they're unlikely to stick around. If you went to, I will just tell you, when I look at resumes all day long, every day I spend a few hours looking at resumes, and I've been doing that and the resumes that are the most attractive are anybody that just shows a commitment to a practice area, like one practice area. And then because we do law firm placements, people that are committed to law firms. So that's it. And if you're committed to law firms and you're committed to a practice area and it looks like you're pretty stable, then you're marketable. It's not just because you went to a great law school, it's not what makes you marketable. No, it's important, good law schools. It's important for certain firms and it does show a lot. And the idea is that if you were really motivated in the past, when you were in your early 20s to get into a good law school, then you're probably going to be able to channel that motivation into something significant if you apply yourself in one direction in a law firm. So it's very smart for law firms to hire the best people, but it has to be meaningful. So let me just see, try to find some longer questions. So these are more academic questions, which I think are important. So this next one is, how do you recommend candidates address a perceived weakness in their application, such as a lower GPA or lack of extracurricular activities during an interview without seeming defensive or making excuses? Okay, so the first thing is with grades. You shouldn't grades do not belong on your resume unless they're awesome. So I don't understand it, but I see people all the time without bad grades. They'll put something like GPA 2.7, which might be good at certain schools, or GPA 3.2 or something. But in every law school, by the way, like when I went to law school, I think they had a mean, and 80% of the classes between like a 2.9 and a 3.1 or something. But putting on your resume that you had a 3.1 does not look good. So you're better off just saying whatever. And putting your GPA on your resume is a big no-no, unless it's great. You put it on there, but a lot of people do that. So you shouldn't do that. The next thing is, no one really cares too much about your extracurricular activities when you're applying for jobs. People put things on like they're on this student association or this, and it's pretty much meaningless. You can put it on there if you want to make it look like you have an interest in something, but really that the law firms aren't going to be that impressed with any type of extracurricular activities. If you did something that's great, but I mean, I think being a law review at certain schools is a good thing. Maybe doing a journal because it gives you proofreading. So some of the stuff is good, but it's not really that big of a deal. And then your lower GPA. So how do you do this without seeming defensive or making excuses? Most employers aren't going to care. They're going to interview you. They're going to look at your grades and they're like, whatever. And if they're asking you about your grades, then then you can talk about them, but most of the time they won't. And most of them don't care. Again, the grades are going to make a difference between the type of firm you get into. So some firms will have cutoffs. So I've hired people before that have been in from recruiting roles and huge law firms and things. And certain law firms will just have cutoffs and they'll be like, you can't work there if you don't. So you won't even get an interview. But most firms don't care. And especially when you talk about, and I just want to keep coming back to this, your consumer-facing versus your company-facing firm. If you're interviewing with a consumer-facing firm, meaning they're interviewing you to represent individuals in divorce or personal injury, or if maybe it's insurance defense representing, they're not going to be too concerned with your grades. The only time they're going to be concerned with your grades is if you're interviewing with a company-facing place, and then there's a lot of competition. But honestly, the things about the people are more concerned about when they're interviewing with than your GPA and your extracurricular activities, or how much they like you, how committed you seem to the practice area, how much you want to do the job, and that sort of thing. So it's interesting, like the best resumes for any practice area are always people that show some sort of commitment or interest in it, like some historical interest, like from their past, or everything seems to make sense. So an example would be if you see a resume, like this is fun. So you look at a resume, and I see resumes like this all the time, and the resume might say law school name, and then it'll say member of the Entertainment Law Society. I don't know, but I'm just giving you an example. Entertainment Law Society. And then it might say, I don't know, so you have the law school name, something like that. And then maybe their experience is they worked at Warner Brothers one summer, Warner Brothers before law school. And now the person, and then their current employer, big firm, corporate department. So what people do wrong all the time is, and then maybe they even have interest, and they would write, I don't know, directing movies, or I don't know, you get the idea. So a lot of times the mistake that people will make is they will, on their resume, they'll have all this stuff that makes it look like they really want to do entertainment law when they're doing corporate. And it's exactly what happens. Like people that look like this with a resume will always end up doing something related to entertainment. So wherever they're working, if it's a big firm corporate department, one foot's always out the door, they're never committed. So the best way to make yourself strong for any employer is to make sure that everything really looks, and this person, by the way, would be a good person for an entertainment firm, but you would want to make everything look like corporate. How would you fix this resume if the person wanted to work in another corporate department? You'd have the law school, and then you might have business journal, or I don't know, business journal. And then your interest would be Warner Brothers. I don't know, you might have that. Or you'd have bank, right? And then you might have interest, might be stock market, I don't know, anything related to business. And so the people, when your resume looks very strong for a practice area, a certain type of thing, and again, this could be personal injury, it could be whatever. I mean, but if your resume looks very strong in one direction, people are going to be much more enthusiastic about you than if it looks like you're not interested. So they're more concerned, and I just want to understand this point, is people are more concerned about, does your resume look like you want to do this type of work, than your grades? Because if it looks like you're going to do this type of work, what they're concluding, any employer is concluding, is that you probably want the job and you're likely to stick around. That's more important to employers than your grades. Garbage plan, how's the best way to talk about it? Yeah, just you bring it up when you get an offer. You don't bring it up right away. So you talk about it at the offer stage. And that's actually a good question. But yeah, you don't presume to ask a question like that beforehand. Yeah, this is good. I'm going to all these questions. And I like these long questions too, by the way. Thank you. Have you ever seen a successful candidate when the government agency or public interest to stand on a law firm interview? So how do they do it? Yeah, so I see it all the time. So you can definitely leverage your experience doing one of those things to get a law firm. And your question is, how do they do so? So I'm going to talk about real briefly, which is interesting. I'll talk about these kind of ranking systems, but at the same time, it depends on what you're doing. So there's nothing wrong with working in a government agency or public interest organization. Clerking for a federal judge or any type of judge is a litigation related role. Working in a government agency is that way too, or public interest. But if you're working in one of those organizations, is there a practice area relevant to what you're doing? What you were doing. So I saw a candidate the other day that was just freaking amazing. I think the person I think they were from Stanford, and they went to do something with a public interest organization in immigration. And I think that person's a great candidate. But is there a practice area relevant to what you're doing? So if so, you're in good shape. But what is that practice area? So sometimes it could be environmental, or it could be, I don't know, but is there a practice area relevant to what you're doing? Because just remember that anytime someone sees your resume, they're asking these questions. They're asking, can you be managed? Do you want the job? Is this something that you're likely to want? And in a lot of cases, the answer may be no. But the point is, anybody, and I want everyone on this call to make sure I really make this point, anybody that wants to work in a law firm can get a job in a law firm. It's not hard. There's incredible numbers of law firms out there. There's so many law firms that I think it's impossible to track them. They're opening every day, but the law firms are ranked from, and I would say that you can rank them from 5 to 1. So 5 would be your huge firms representing huge clients. And then your 1 firms, and these rankings, there's nothing negative about these rankings, are firms representing individuals without a lot of money. So these with huge budget. The money to spend on legal stuff. So this is without a lot of money or no money, right? So no money. So these are how firms work. And then 4 would be smaller, this would be mid-sized, and this would be individuals and maybe even small companies. So if you're looking for a job, it's the stress that people are always under, and they're saying, oh, I got laid off. And typically these are still your AmLaw 200 type firms or similar. The stress that people feel when they're laid off or whatever is, and again, most people that get laid off are at 4 firms or whatever. They're like, oh, I was laid off and this is horrible news. I don't know what to do. I can't find a job. Well, what everyone's trying to do is they're all trying to get jobs at these 4 firms, another one, which is hard, or they're laid off from a 5 firm and lose their job, and they're trying to get a job at another 5 or 4 firm. But you have this whole kind of universe of things that people aren't considering, which are sometimes mid-sized firms or individuals and small companies, or 2 firms or 1 firms. And anytime you're looking for a job and you're not an ideal candidate on paper, like you're working in a government agency or a public interest organization, these firms anyone can get a job. And when I say anyone, it's not that hard to get a job at a 1 firm. They're not going to pay a lot. Like I know someone who am I thinking of? Someone that worked at a huge firm, Gibson Dunn, and went to Ivy League law school and did really well, and now has a personal injury firm in Los Angeles. And I was like, how much do you pay your associates? And he said, I don't know, 50 or 60,000. And which obviously in Los Angeles is not a big salary, but that's what the person pays. And so you can always get a job in one of these 1 or 2 firms, or it's not that hard. And that's what happens. You can leverage your experience, government agency or public interest organization, to work in one of these small firms. And that's who's going to hire you. These firms, these 5 and 4 firms that are paying these huge salaries, aren't going to take a chance if they know what's good for them. No offense, and even the 3 firms probably won't take a chance. So these 1 and 2 firms will, though. They have nothing to lose. They're paying very little money. They don't care. They're willing to take a risk. It's how many people are going to go to work in Los Angeles as a 7th or 8th year attorney for 50? Not many people. So that's all that happens. If it's hard for you to get a job, you just need to lower your expectations and the type of size firm you're interested in working for. And if you do that, you're fine. So let's see. Let's see. All right, so what's this? Next step, what's next? Where are the places, websites, general legal job openings, or what do you do to seek positions? Yeah, so there's a couple of different ways. I don't know. That's this question. It's a fun question. But there's a couple of different ways to find jobs. Obviously, there's lots of websites out there. One that I own is called Law Crossing, which is a consolidation site, which goes out and looks for jobs everywhere. Obviously, there's other sites, and the reason this is good is it shows jobs regardless of whether there's pay to post. So it means it'll find jobs everywhere. And then also there's sites like, and then it also shows archives, which are all the jobs it's ever had. And then, of course, you have sites like Indeed, and there's tons of different places. So there's lots of job openings. Most legal job openings, by the way, are posted on employer websites. But I believe if I was looking for a job, obviously recruiters like myself are good because we're a placement agency. But at the same time, if you're not in a position to use a recruiter, if you work in a law firm and you're in a practice area you have experience in one practice area, obviously you can work with a recruiter. But if you don't want to work with a recruiter or you're doing things on your own, many times you can just apply to firms. You find people to apply to inside the firms or employers that have the kind of position you want. And that really is a really good way to get a position. So very few people, when they're looking for a job, will apply to employers without openings. The benefit of applying to firms without openings or employers without openings is you're the only applicant. And then something like Law Crossing is very useful, because what Law Crossing does is there's tens of thousands of law firms. So Law Crossing goes and looks at every law firm website it can find and then takes the jobs off of there and then posts them. And whereas a site like Indeed, they're showing jobs that the employers are paying to post. So you're not going to get as many there. And so Law Crossing is going to show you stuff that other people don't know about, which is good. And it does that for in-house and government and things. But what I recommend, if you are looking for a job, there's also archive jobs on Law Crossing, which is interesting. So that'll show you anyone that's had positions like that in the past, and that can be useful as well. So these are things that I would do if I was looking for a job. Okay, here's a good question. Okay. I lost my job in January as a first year, but I'm not starting to get interviews. However, some of the interviews are for a position that require 2 to 3 years of experience. Do I have a shot at this job? Yeah, you're fine. So you have nothing to do. If you're applying for jobs that require 2 to 3 years of experience and you only have 2 to 3 months, it sounds like, of experience, you can definitely apply for those jobs. Employers will hire you for them. There's typically types of openings. And I just talked about this real briefly, but you have junior, I guess you would say very junior, you have junior, very junior, I guess, would be less than 1 year here. And then you have junior, which is like 1 to 2, mid-level, which is like 3 to 6. And then you have senior, which is 7 to 5. So these are just rough numbers. But the idea is that when you're applying for positions, if someone's looking for a mid-level and you're a junior, you can still apply. If someone's looking for a senior and you have 5 years, you can still apply. So the law firms are not necessarily wed to these numbers. In large law firms, like the largest, they may say, we're looking for a freaking 5th year. And when they say 5th year, they mean it. Like they only want a 5th year. But that would be the largest firms. But even the largest firms many times will be flexible with those numbers. So you don't need to worry so much about when you're applying for jobs. You don't necessarily need to worry. If you're getting the interviews, it just shows you right there that they don't care. So you don't need to worry too much about it. Let me just see this next question. You're midway through the interview process, third round for a global GC position, and you know the salary advertised for this in the USA, but you're based in Europe. Can you use the U? No, that's a good question. So typically people, and for those that are on the call that haven't, European companies will often, people working in Europe will often pay much less, or companies in Europe will often pay much less than even to American attorneys than they're paid in the U.S. So a job in Europe might pay $300,000, and the U.S. the same job could pay $500,000. But if the job is based in Europe, you have to be careful. So I would, if it was me and I was negotiating the job and I did get the job, I would basically try to negotiate, not telling them maybe if you feel comfortable doing that, but I would be very careful, because I've seen a lot of things go sideways with American attorneys getting offers from European firms and companies, and then the European company or firm being like, that's what we pay people that work here. You need to be careful, even after the offer. So I saw something happen once where where it was a big magic circle firm and they made one of my candidates an offer, and but the offer was in the UK, and my candidate was also a UK citizen, and was like, why is this so low? And the reason is that they paid people in the UK a lot less than he was in the United States, but he had I don't know, his family was, I don't know, whatever, but it doesn't matter. But anyway, and then they actually were mad when he tried to negotiate and withdrew it. So you need to be careful, is all I would say with this kind of stuff, with negotiating salaries. Sometimes I don't think, but if I would be careful about how you deal with that. But I would say it's probably negotiable. Let's see. Okay, so the law firm says they need someone with experience in a niche. How often will a candidate be successful when negotiating a higher salary than, quote, an initial interview and negotiating a fully remote schedule after an offer? Okay, so that's good. So if you have that niche type of experience in the law firm and it's very difficult for them to find someone like you, then yes, you can definitely potentially be very successful in negotiating all of this stuff. I haven't seen, anything like I've used to see in the past in terms of how aggressive you can get with this kind of stuff, but candidates are often very successful if they have a special niche. But let me just explain to everyone some problems sometimes with negotiating high salaries. And so law firms, if they really need someone with your niche experience, then they will often give you what you want. So they'll give you a higher salary, or they'll allow you to work remotely. But the problem is that things change. Right now, for example, corporate has been very slow, and people are having a lot of problems in markets like capital markets and stuff. So people that a couple of years ago were negotiating with employers and expecting a lot, or refusing to only work remote, are suddenly dealing with employers that don't have as much work. And so the people that negotiated the hardest when things were good are often some of the first people to go, because there's resentment or whatever, or they're considered harder to manage. So you do want to be careful when you negotiate this stuff. You can negotiate very aggressively with employers, but just keep in mind that unless you're really delivering when you get there and really providing a lot of value, if things slow down, it could present problems for you later. So that's just something to consider. And I've had, in my case, I've seen before that people have come in and negotiated all this stuff, but then if things slow down or the market changes, they're often the first to go. So you need to be careful. Okay, so let me see. This is actually interesting. So this person says, I asked for post-interview feedback and was told I'm overqualified. Okay, so that just means when they say you're overqualified, that means that you're going to get there and you're not going to be able to be managed, or you are going to expect more money, all that sort of stuff. So that's all. So you need to come in and act like a team player. And really what I would recommend would be all this advice that I've given today about being able to be managed and acting like you want the job, and are all really important things in terms of not giving the employer the sense you're overqualified. If the employer is saying you're overqualified, essentially what they're saying is they think that it'll be difficult to manage, or you may expect more money in the market, and they don't want to have someone that they have to pay as much. And just be really careful with that. That's what they're saying. I was thinking about this not too long ago, and I was thinking about mistakes that I've made hiring people and things. And I remember once I hired someone, and the person was making very little money, and I was like, oh, that's probably pretty smart. Maybe I can hire this person for the same kind of little bit of money and give them a little bit more money. And I did. And then after several months, the person became resentful, and they had every reason to be, because they weren't being paid enough, and then mad and that kind of thing, and then ended up leaving and not under good circumstances. So why am I bringing that up? I'm bringing that up because employers are greedy, and I was greedy and made a mistake, and they will hire anybody if they think they're cheap enough, or and they think they have the upper hand, but it's not always the smartest thing to do. So maybe you were interviewing for a job that was paying less than they know you're capable of making, or something, and that's why they didn't hire you. And that would be what I would think would have happened, something along those lines. Okay, let's see here. What are your thoughts? Yeah. So I think if it's a startup law firm, I think a lot of times very young law firms that have these sorts of issues, I think you can sometimes ask about this stuff in a startup in talking to a law firm. I think it's okay to bring this stuff up. I would bring it up after you get the job and express your concerns to them. One of the things that I would also recommend with startup law firms. So law firms when they start up, where they get into trouble is they get into trouble when they start hiring people and then they hire more people than they can afford. So if you're a law firm, essentially have office space and phones and secretaries and stuff, but you're essentially renting out people's minds. And so it's pretty high profit. That's your goal. So a lot of new law firms will get themselves in trouble. They'll do things like hire too many people and they will make bad business decisions when they're starting. And so you need to be, anytime you're looking at a brand new law firm, you need to realize that the law firm doesn't have experience managing things and is likely to make a lot of mistakes. And therefore, you just need to be careful, because the kind of people a law firm hires when it's starting are not the kind of people that it would hire years later. All these sorts of questions that you're asking are precisely the kind of things that don't happen at established law firms, and because they have to bring in systems and things to make the law firm run better. And the oldest and the best law firm, or the most respected law firms, typically have very clear guidelines about the way things operate and stuff. So it's just a little bit different so you need to be careful, I was just saying, with joining younger law firms. But yeah, you can ask those sorts of questions. How can I convince interviewers that I'm interested in the work they do if my resume doesn't have the background? Yeah, the example in terms of how you would do that is you should take classes, you should join associations, you should do whatever you can to look like that's your interest. So the law firm, if there's a way that the law firm can see that on your resume, that would be helpful. But yeah, no law firm in their right mind, if you don't have the experience without anything on your resume, is going to hire you unless you have that. So again, I'll just come back to this point, that ultimately what sells is you're not going to get a resume at a 4 or 5, a job at a 4 or 5 firm in IP if you're a healthcare attorney, but you might get a job at a 2 firm or 1 firm that's going to take a chance on you. So there has to be something that's outweighing your lack of focus. And so no 4 or 5 firms going to interview you or bring you in. They have no incentive to if you're trying to do something different. So you just need to be very careful. Yeah, so being foreign educated is very difficult. If you're from a foreign country and a foreign college and you maybe came over here and got a lot of people do that. It's sad because most of them aren't able to get jobs, and they'll get jobs maybe as a consultant or for 1 year in a big firm, but it's very difficult if you're educated in a foreign country, in a foreign college. So how do you deal with that? People get jobs all the time, but again, it's the same sort of thing. So anyone that has any problem or is concerned about getting a job, it's just, you just have to work at the smaller firms. That's all. The smaller, the lowest paying firms, you have to start somewhere before you can move up. People that go educate in foreign countries and foreign colleges will always try to get jobs in the very best US firms, and that's fine, but that doesn't always work. So what they do is they think, oh, I need to apply to one of these AmLaw 100 firms or whatever. And people do get jobs in these. I'm not saying it's impossible, because it's definitely possible. But most of the people that get jobs in the best US law firms have worked in a really good firm in their foreign country and then come over here and then try to do the same. And usually they'll get these jobs for a short period of time. It'll be like a 1-year job or 2-year jobs, but they usually don't last. But if you really want to live in the US and work in the US full time, the only thing you need to worry about is if you can't get a job in one of the major firms, and just get a job in smaller firms. And I was talking, it was very funny. Years ago, I don't know when it was, but I was talking to this, and I never see people like this, so I thought it was very funny. But there was this candidate I had he was in Nebraska or something, and he was representing, I don't know, farmers or just something really funny. But he was from China, and had come over and gone to University of Nebraska or something for law school, and had this job where he was working like in some small town and representing farmers and doing tractor sales and things, and then negotiating with seed companies. And I thought it was the funniest thing in the world, but he got a job, and it was a small firm. But it was very funny because he just was obviously the in an area where there's probably no one that's from a foreign country at all, in the middle of nowhere. But the point is that you can always get a job in the US if you're from a foreign country, but it's not always going to be in the biggest firms. And that's where people make the mistake, because they think that's the only thing that there is. Let's see here. And it's not. Okay, if it turns out you've addressed your cover letter to the wrong person, but have the contact information for the correct person, so you send a corrected cover letter, how would you phrase the email? So the first thing is, no, most law firms don't care. If you send to the wrong person, it goes to the right person. It's not really that big of a deal. But you certainly can send a second one. There's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes that's smart. But again, law firms receive so many emails and cover letters and things that there's nothing wrong with that. You can definitely send it to the right person. Next question. Is it a problem if I'm invited for interview and seem too unavailable? If a firm asks what days work best for me, saying any day works, is that too desperate? No, I would just say, let me know the best time for you and I'll try to make it work. Something like that. And law firms like that. But don't say any day, any time. Just say, let me know what time's best for you and I'll try to make it work. And that's probably the best way to handle that. Okay, let me see if there's anything else that I missed that might be good. I think I've gotten here. So this is another good question. I think I've got most of the questions. So what is a good way to tell of successes without sounding like you're bragging? The best way really is most of your successes should come through in your resume. And when you talk about successes, you don't want to make it seem like you're a lone wolf. You want to make it seem like you were able to do things based on the help of other people and the advice of other people and things like that. So you make other people feel like they're included, and that makes you look like a nice person. So that's really the best way. But you don't want to go in and there's actually kind of two types of bragging. So bragging to associates, if you're an associate, is bad because you're competing with them. So if you're bragging to associates at your level, that's not good because they're competitors of yours. But if you're bragging to partners and you're an associate, to partners equals good because they're going to think they want competitive people working for them. So just think about it that way. So if you're bragging to associates at your level, that makes it seem like you're that you could be a competitor of theirs, and they're not going to like that, and that was going to turn them off. But if you're bragging to partners about things you've done, they're going to like that because it's going to basically be your competitor and that sort of thing. Okay, let's see here. Okay, so I don't know this question, but this is there any type of practice areas or locations? Yeah, so the highest compensation is typically going to be in the largest markets where there's the most competition, and in practice areas that are going to be the highest are always going to be practice areas where people are representing companies as opposed to individuals. Okay, let's see. What is this? I'm sure fire away. So the best way to appear like you really want the job you're interviewing for is to just go in and be very excited, to know about the firm, to know everything you can, and to be very excited about the firm that you're interviewing with. That's really the best thing. And then to look like there's some consistency on your resume and it represents something that you've always wanted to do. All right, let me see here. Oh, I think that's about all the questions. So I certainly appreciate everyone being here today. I'm not sure we'll cover next week, but I enjoyed doing this and hope this interview talk was helpful today. I will send around all of these notes to everyone about the stuff we covered. And then these are usually posted also within a week or so. But again, I do recommend I think the final piece of advice I would give everyone is to really put yourself in the shoes of an employer that's interviewing you and don't really think about yourself as much. Like people tend to be more focused on themselves. And so just realize that the employer just wants to hire people that are going to do whatever they ask, that are going to stick around, that want to be there, that will follow instructions, and that are likable. And those are really the biggest things. But I'll send this around to everyone. And I do, if you go and watch other webinars that I've done, I always cover these topics, whether it's related to resumes or other things. And again, preparing the stuff is going to make you much more effective in your interviews. So thank you for being here today, and I will talk to everyone next week.